Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Tuesday Tips. That's episode 34 on our regular chat on all things school challenges facing school leaders. I'm Michael Barber, and we're on at the Grow Schools channel. I've got two colleagues here today, Michael Soh on your left, although my head appears to be going right, and on the other side, Mary Dillon. Two of my colleagues from Grow Schools. We are following up on a conversation we had last week related to two things: construction as well as leases, and questions schools should be asking, potential challenges or pitfalls that school leaders are having around those topics. So, first question I want to tee up to Michael is, what are some construction best practices for successful projects for schools?
Yeah, hi Michael. Thanks for having me. Some of the best practices is when you're starting out a project, it's always important to establish a budget and a delivery date. That those would 100% change as the project goes on, but it's just really good to set some expectations and goals and work towards those, knowing that they will change slightly. But that's really important. You got to have a target that you're trying to meet. I would say the next most important best practice is really just setting up a strong team. The architect is always the most important. They're really going to be your leader. They're going to be hiring all the consultants and engineers and really driving the project. So I would say that spending the extra time to go through and vet different groups, figure out their experience, meet with them, speak to their clients, and really spend the right amount of time speaking to different architect groups, getting price comparisons is really important to have a really good idea of who's going to be the best fit for the project. Um,
Okay.
the next most important, I would say, would be an owner's rep. As a school leader, you're going to want to be focusing on what you do best, which is running your school. And I think having extra resources and extra team members, such as an owner's rep, who would be a local expert, experienced in education, can visit the site and can really offer some good guidance. I think that would be the next most important group to have on, just extra set of ears and an extra representative looking out for your side. I think is really important. The next step I would say was always run a competitive bidding process. A lot of times it's just easy to say, hey, we know an architect, we know a contractor, let's just work with them. But I think you can really have a lot of benefit from seeing different groups, comparing them, getting competitive pricing, just seeing what the differences are between them. So I always recommend 3 to 4. If you can get 6, 7, 8 different groups, it's a really great comparison. So that's another best practice is you always want to have a competitive bidding process. Just make sure you're getting the best value and the best group for your school. Next is when you are going through the design process, you definitely want to identify all the entitlements and permits you're going to need. It's really important to identify those early on so that it's not a surprise. Depending on your jurisdiction or your county, maybe it's just a building permit, maybe it's other entitlements such as going through CEQA if you're in California, ULURP if you're in New York, getting change in use, master use, historic preservation. There's just a ton of things out there that could be a surprise. So you want to make sure you identify them. The way that you could do that is there's land use attorneys, permit expediters, the architects are usually the best resource, as well as owner reps that have gone through similar projects. So identifying the entitlements and permitting process, as well as how long it could take, because it would really be unfortunate to get through the design process. Think it's only going to take a month to get a building permit, but actually it takes 6 to 8 or a year, and you're going to miss your target. So I'd say those are the best practices for setting up a successful construction project.
I'm actually going to stay with you, Michael, and follow up on two of the specific items you mentioned at the top of that answer. And that was both time and on budget as it relates to projects. Can you talk specifically to those two about how school leaders can ensure their projects stay on time and on budget?
Yeah, I think just throughout the design, pre-construction, and construction process, just taking the time to make decisions. There's always going to be challenges and unknowns as you go through, but I think really taking the time, gathering all the facts, speaking to the owner's rep, the architect in different groups, and just trying to make the best decision possible. Another effort that I always recommend schools and just personally going through is a value engineering practice. So the architect will go through the design process. Usually, when you're about the design development stage, which is right before the final stage, which is construction documents, you want to kind of just take a step back and look through and say, hey, is there anything that's designed that we could replace, that we could change? to make the project more, or to reduce the cost of the project, potentially scope, and make sure that it stays on budget. So architects do tend to just kind of design and not keep a price in mind. So you just want to always take a step back, say, let's do a value engineering exercise, and as a way to save dollars. In terms of schedule, I would say that it's really important to just build a detailed schedule early on. It's going to go through all the planning, through the design, through pre-construction, through GC bidding, all the way through construction and closeout. And you just monitor that every single week. A practice that I do is I will review all the schedules for our projects, identify which items are slipping, which are a day late, a few weeks late, and see how it affects the schedule, and just let everybody know. So I'm just trying to keep everybody informed. And the moment that one thing is delayed, it can be a ripple effect and push everything out. But just identifying those items that are going to delay the project. It could be as simple as the architect is a few weeks behind on their design. That'll push everything out. Identifying that, addressing it, and doing everything you can to bring it back within the allowable timeline. So I'd say that those are two items that you can do to try to keep it on budget and on schedule. Is really just making decisions throughout the process as a team, and just keeping the budget and schedule in mind as you move forward.
Feels like that timeline could be an interesting one for school leaders to pay particular attention to. You consider the ins and outs of school schedules, like pickup and drop off timing, and how that might impact certain aspects of the construction project, summer vacations, those sorts of things. This is an on the fly question from sort of my own brain, if you will, as you were going through that answer. But have you seen how school leaders handle those sorts of unique nature of a school schedule, and how they can use them either in their favor, or at least plan around construction projects as it relates to schools being in session, out of session, different times of day? Anything there to add?
Sure. So I'd say a lot of the projects that I am undertaking, they're it's like a new build, or it's a new facility, so the students aren't currently there. But I would say that if there is construction going on while the school is inhabited, or there's students and classes going on, I would say it's just really important to have a long planning process with a contractor. It's really important in terms of safety, making sure that there's fenced access, and making sure that students can't get to the construction area, and as well just keeping everybody safe. So it's really important to have like a really solid logistics plan, making sure the contractor is aware of when pickups are, when school hours are, when breaks are, because I would say that they will be slowed down a little bit because of the working in an inhabited building. But if they know ahead of time, hey, there's spring break, Christmas break, we're gonna have off these times, and they can really devote a ton of time to expedite during that period. So I would really just say, just sitting down, having a really solid understanding of both groups, and making sure that there's a solid plan to make sure everybody's safe, everything's fenced off, that especially after hours, that nobody can access the construction site, because there could always be dangers and mishaps that could happen. So just making sure that really everybody's on the same page, and there's a long plan and process ahead of time.
Yeah, such sage advice there related to construction projects when it comes to what school leaders should be thinking about. Before I turn my attention over to Mary and some questions on leases, just want to welcome in any additional viewers that have joined us. We're here every Tuesday, 1 o'clock Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, if I'm getting my time zones correct. I think I am. Or sorry, say 10 a.m. Pacific. I'm not getting them right. 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, every week on Tuesday Tips here, where we tackle all the pressing challenges facing school leaders. And we're talking about construction development best practices today with Michael Soh, one of my colleagues, and another one of my colleagues, Mary Dillon, has joined us today on questions related that we got from our follow-up from our webinar last week related to leases. So Mary, I've got 2 questions for you. Would love to hear your thoughts on the common pitfalls or challenges schools should be aware of during their lease negotiations.
Yeah, and thanks for having me, Michael. Good to be here. Yeah, there is lots of challenges that as the schools should be aware of during lease negotiations. A very big one that I see happen a lot is the tenants aren't aware of their responsibilities as it relates to the lease. So, just to need you to be aware of what costs, any maintenance items that the tenant is responsible for, large or small, and what the landlord's responsibilities are. They'll affect the budget as well. So it's important to keep that in mind when you're negotiating the lease. Also, when you're negotiating rent and things like that, as it relates to the lease, you want to be thinking about total costs involved, not just the rent. There will usually be items like property taxes and property insurances that will be a responsibility of the tenant in most cases. So just to bear that in mind and keep that in your head when you're negotiating costs and rent amounts. You want to be aware of the condition of the building. If the building is in great condition, then great. If it's not in great condition, you need to be aware of that. You also want to be aware of renewal terms of the lease, because that'll affect how you run your school and how long you can be there. You want to be aware of termination clauses and options to extend. This is important to be aware of these dates, as the window of opportunity for these items usually closes. So you want to be aware of those dates and negotiate them correctly when you're negotiating a lease. It's also useful to negotiate a right of first refusal. That can be helpful if additional space becomes available and you would like first refusal on that space, and you should have that written into the lease as well. So that should be talked about during lease negotiations. What else do we need to talk about? Another thing I would always say to schools when they're looking at a building is the facility able to be can it adapt to different conditions? So, if you have a large, room that could be a multi-purpose room or a gymnasium, or it could double up as a cafeteria or a dance studio, just that it can be flexible, that spaces can be flexible. And we've seen that come up quite a lot over the last few years. Look, you also want to look for opportunities within the facility if there's potential to expand, because as a school grows, they may need additional classrooms and things like that. So keep that in mind as well. And then finally, I would really say beware of legal and regulatory compliance and requirements. This is important that you're aware of all of these things so that you're not kind of blindsided when they come up later on in the lease. And I would really say, if you consider all of these items when you're negotiating your lease, during the negotiation period, you will set yourself up for a successful lease term.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure it'll make a school leader way more confident to understand all those different tactics as they go into that negotiation period. One of the items you mentioned was total cost and its impact on negotiation. But I would also imagine that, lease decisions need to align, especially around total cost, around what the school's overall financial strategy and goals are. So can you talk to how do you make those decisions and align them to a school's overarching financial strategy?
Sure. Yeah, like it's obviously crucial, right? Because your lease payments and your lease costs are going to be probably one of your biggest line items, probably after payroll. So it hugely impacts a school. You really should consider your long-term budget planning, cash flow management, the term of the lease, and the facility costs, as they do all impact the financials. And, I'll start by saying the facility costs, as it relates to facility costs. You need to consider, if your lease is what we call a triple net lease, then the tenant will be responsible for the short, medium, and potentially long-term repairs and improvements in the building. They can be very costly items. For example, if a roof needs to be replaced, that can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars. Also, new HVAC units, they can be 10 or 15 grand per unit, and most schools will have at least 10 of them. So you just need to be very mindful of these costs so that you can plan accordingly. you should have, I would always recommend that a school will have a property condition inspection carried out. And when that happens, you'll get a report which will give you an indication of the timing and the costs associated with all of these items that I've just mentioned. And you can budget accordingly. The lease duration is the other big one, because how long do you want your lease to be? Do you want a longer term lease? Do you want a shorter term lease with the option to pop out if things aren't working out? What I will say is a longer term lease provides more stability, obviously. And you can also often lock into more favorable terms when you have a longer term lease. So even though it does come with some risks, it's worth considering as well. Another thing that impacts the school's budgets and financials is escalators. It's from a landlord's perspective, we love escalators, but tenants aren't always fully aware of what they are and the impact they can have. And what they are is it's a rent increase basically that happens usually on an annual basis. It's usually typically around 3 or 4% per year, but it can also be a variable and can be linked to CPI, what the CPI is that year or the year before, or an increase in the school's ADA. So just to really pay attention to those things and budget accordingly for that rent increase that will happen year on year. They are really the main things, Michael, I would say that you need to kind of really be aware of and consider for the overall financial strategy and goals for the school.
Yeah, such good tips from both of you from Michael on construction development best practices, and from Mary on all things leases. We usually try and keep these conversations to 10 minutes, and we've gone over by a few, so we want to be respectful of everyone's time and say thanks to the both of you for joining us for the conversation. And we'll be back next week with covering another challenge related to school leaders. I think we're diving into all things video and how you can leverage video for your enrollment marketing purposes, as well as social media. So I hope you'll come back next week at Tuesday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, here on YouTube and LinkedIn. And again, Mary and Michael, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.